Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to Watchbox, and thanks for logging on. If you love this watch, email me, tmosso at thewatchbox.com. Your purchase and pricing email question line for buying this or any watch you see here on our channel, our website, or our social media. It's in the description below. Reach out to me directly, tmosso at thewatchbox.com. Today, we are discussing one of the earliest examples of the FP Journe Tourbillon Remontoir, the first generation Tourbillon Remontoir with third series characteristics, 38 millimeters in rose gold. We're going to go over what makes this a third series in a moment. Let's talk about the basics of fit and feel. So 38 millimeters, the original and now discontinued FP Journe case size. The watch is slim in profile, only 9.3 millimeters thick, 44.5 millimeters from lug to lug. Evidence that the watch has never been polished in the sharp creases, curves, and definition of the case, and a space between the lugs of 20 millimeters, which means you'll have a universe of strap options in that universal size. As you can see, this is an FP Journe factory strap, large rectangular scale alligator leather on the top, a contrasting golden stitch that perfectly matches the case, gloss finish. You can see right here we have a folded edge profile. On the underside, small round scale alligator leather, gator on both sides because that lasts longer. It is tougher, it's more expensive, but this watch is worth it. Pull tab spring bars so you can quickly remove the strap without tools for cleaning or replacement, and a curved spring bar is used so that there is full motion of the strap without impediment against the case, also allowing you to have a very integrated look with no daylight visible between strap and case. And of course, it is a brand new FP Journe factory strap. A simple matching rose gold pin buckle is attached for quick on-the-fly adjustments, and you can see the characteristic FP Journe case shape. Integrated lugs with a nice taper, a mid-case defined by the overlapping lip of the case back and the bezel, the deeply knurled double dimple style polished Journe crown, and the entirety of the case and bezel all of high polish with a domed bezel profile. Now you can see this dial is nicely toned by aging. These early FP Journe watches used a little bit of varnish over the metal of the dial, which creates a luminous, almost three-dimensional appearance, as some of the features of the dial, which are printed onto the dial and the varnish, appear to float a little bit above the dial base. The varnish also has a tendency to age and discolor a little bit, and it's always desirable to have a small amount of aging effect to these dials. Not damage, not water, not oxidation, nothing like that, just subtle evidence that this is one of the extremely hand-built early Journe models, and no two are exactly alike nearly 20 years later. Now this is a third series Tourbillon Remontoire, which means it's not the first 20 watches. Those were the subscriptions, and they would say 1 through 20 on the dial. It's also not the second series watch. You know, because it doesn't have a rounded Remontoire cock. Rounded Remontoire cock with no 1 through 20 labeling, that would be a series 2. But it's also not a series 4 because, as you can see, it features large dial side bolts. So this is a series 3. How many series 3s were made? Somewhere between 220 and 320. Only a handful, certainly less than 500, of the original 38mm Tourbillon Remontoire were constructed, so these are very collectible. As you can see, all of the characteristics of the original 1991 Journe Tourbillon Remontoire wristwatch prototype are pretty much here. You've got the power reserve indicator, you've got the open tourbillon carriage with the half-sided bridge, you've got the cock for the Remontoire, which is a one-sided bridge for a mechanism that exerts constant force on the escapement. We'll talk about that in a moment. And we have a separate dial bounded by a black polished steel bezel that is framing the time. So 42-hour power was a manual wind because this watch was billed as a chronometer for the wrist, not COSC. Journe has his own in-house chronometer standards, but he's looking back to the marine chronometer era, and that's why this watch represents 0 when it's fully wound, 0 hours since fully wound. This is in the fashion of old marine chronometers and deck clocks, which had to be wound exactly 24 hours after the previous winding, which was why it was more important to know how long since the last winding than it was to know how long until the watch would stop. Now, if you look carefully, you can see the original form of the blued steel Journe biomorphic hands, another fashion that is distinctly Journe. You'll also note one of the other distinctively Journe traits. All of the numerals on the time dial are radially arrayed. That is, they're splayed out from the center rather than arrayed vertically. The tourbillon, which you can see, beats inside a dimple-style track outboard. This effectively acts as your second sub-register. The half-sided bridge is continuously rounded and black polished. All the screw heads you can see are black polished as well. There is a filigree or wire-style tourbillon carriage that is all black polished in its own right. Now it beats away at 21,600 vibrations per hour. It is free-sprung with 6-position adjustment and an overcoil hairspring. These features all geared toward making the watch more accurate. Beaten away at 21.6, nevertheless, if you listen carefully, the watch has 2 heartbeats. One is the 1-second jump of the Remontoire, and one is the 6 beat per second rate of the escapement. Now the Remontoire is this linear titanium spring that you see in the reverse side, and this is the real key to the precision of the caliber 1498. 14 because it's 14 French lean in diameter, and 98 being the year Journe started work on the movement. So that spring acts as a buffer between the mainspring barrel and the tourbillon, so that the barrel, when it's highly wound, doesn't run the tourbillon too fast, it doesn't create excess balance, amplitude, and rate, and when it's wound down, at least down to 28 hours, you're not going to lose amplitude as it starts to run down. Because the spring, not the barrel, exerts the force on the escapement and supplies the energy, the state of the barrel doesn't matter as much. Now, at 28 hours of power reserve elapsed, it will revert to a scrolling seconds, and the Remontoire will turn itself off, and it'll go into a less precise rundown operation mode. So you want to make sure you wind the watch every 28 hours or more in order to keep the Remontoire in action. You can also see that this is a brass movement. This was characteristic of early Journe watches up to mid-2004. The brass movements, of course, are silvered because they're rhodium plated, but after that, Journe replaced the movements with solid rose gold, which is more valuable as a commodity, but less valuable as a collectible because those are more common. It is a 25 jewel movement. Jewel count not always listed on Journe watches, so it's interesting to chart the changes. You can also see that the case is stamped 01T, T being the reference of the original Tourbillon Remontoire, and 01 being the year the case was made. After about mid-2005, the case year of manufacture stopped being stamped on the reverse side. If you look carefully, you can see the maker's mark of Eleanor outside of Paris, and also both Swiss and French hallmarks on the case. This is something that was discontinued after roughly mid-2008 when Journe bought Eleanor, which had been his case supplier dating back to 1983 in his first pocket watch, but he bought Eleanor and moved it to Geneva as Boîtier de Genève, his in-house movement, or I should say case factory. He makes his own movements in Geneva at the Rue de Synagogue plant, and then outside at Plan-les-Ouates he has Boîtier de Genève, which makes cases these days, and Cadronier de Genève, which makes dials. This watch predates all of that. This is the ultimate collectible FP Journe Tourbillon. If you want core vintage FP Journe, you want to get yourself a Tourbillon Remontoire of one of the first 4 series or Ruthenium, and you want to get yourself a Series 1 Resonance. This is halfway to the grail. Email tmosso@thewatchbox.com for purchase and pricing details.